Daniel sat alone in his grand mansion, the lights from the city shining through his wide glass windows. He had everything a man could ever want: cars, money, a successful company, and influence in high society. Yet his heart felt empty. His mind always returned to one bitter memory. Years ago, Daniel was a different man. He believed in love. He was deeply in love with Victoria, a beautiful woman with charm and confidence. They had planned a future together. Every detail of their wedding was set. From the flowers to the music, Daniel thought his life was perfect. But just weeks before the wedding, Victoria shattered his world. She had left him not quietly, not kindly, but with cruel words and a selfish choice. She ran away with another man, a wealthy businessman with more power and connections than Daniel at the time. The betrayal was public. Everyone whispered about how Victoria had traded love for money. For Daniel, it was humiliation for the first time. He felt that money and status could not protect him from heartbreak. After that day, Daniel built walls around his heart. He no longer trusted love. He filled his days with work, investments, and success. He told himself that emotions were weakness. He never wanted to feel vulnerable again. People called him cold, some even called him arrogant. But Daniel did not care deep inside. He was protecting himself from ever being broken again. Even with all his success, Daniel often looked at himself in the mirror and saw emptiness in his eyes. His house was filled with luxury but lacked laughter. His table had the best meals but no one to share them with. At night, silence was his only companion. And when he slept, he dreamed of the day Victoria left him. He would wake up angry, bitter, and more determined to hide his pain. One evening, as Daniel scrolled through his emails, he noticed an elegant invitation card placed on his desk. His assistant must have delivered it earlier. It was heavy with golden edges. When he opened it, his chest tightened. It was an invitation to Victoria's wedding. She was marrying the same man she had left him for. Daniel laughed bitterly. His ex-fiancée had the courage to send him an invitation. To him, it felt less like an invite and more like a challenge. The date, the venue, the guest list, everything screamed of wealth and power. It was a reminder that Victoria had chosen a life of status over loyalty. For a moment, Daniel thought of tearing the card and throwing it away. Why should he go? Why should he care? But another thought whispered in his mind. Perhaps he should attend. Not for love, not for closure, but for pride. If he appeared strong, confident, and untouched by the past, it would be a silent victory, yet deep down, Daniel knew he wanted more than just to show up. He wanted to prove to Victoria and to himself that her betrayal had not destroyed him. He wanted to show that he could stand tall, with or without her. But what he did not know was that life was about to lead him into an unexpected encounter that would change everything. That same night, Daniel dressed in a dark suit and decided to take a drive through the city. The roads were wet from rain. The neon lights reflected on the pavement like shattered glass. As his car stopped at a traffic signal, his eyes caught sight of a woman sitting near a corner. She looked fragile, her clothes old and torn. Her hair was messy and her eyes carried both pain and dignity. She was holding a small cardboard sign asking for help. Daniel rarely paid attention to strangers. He was used to seeing beggars on the street, and he had hardened his heart against them. But something about this woman made him pause. Her eyes were not begging, they were proud. They told a silent story of someone who had lost much but had not surrendered her spirit. For the first time in years, Daniel felt something stir inside him. Compassion, curiosity, and a strange pull. He lowered his window and called out to her. His voice was calm but firm. The woman looked up, startled, and hesitated before walking toward his car. "Do you need food?" Daniel asked simply. Her voice was soft, almost breaking. "Yes, I haven't eaten today," without thinking twice. Daniel asked her to get in. The woman froze. Unsure if she could trust him, to her he looked like a man from another world. Wealthy, powerful, untouchable. But there was something sincere in his tone. Something that told her he was not mocking her. Slowly she stepped into the car. The warmth of the leather seats made her shiver. For the first time in weeks, she felt safe. Daniel started the engine and drove toward a restaurant. His mind was racing. He did not know why he had stopped for her, why he cared. All he knew was that this moment felt different. As the city lights flashed outside, Daniel stole a glance at her. She was silent, looking out the window, trying to hide her embarrassment. He did not ask for her story, not yet, but deep down, He felt that this meeting was not an accident. What Daniel did not know was that this woman, a stranger he had just helped, would soon play a role in his life so powerful that it would change not only his past wounds, but his future forever. Daniel and the woman entered a quiet restaurant tucked away from the busy streets. The warm light and soft music inside felt worlds apart from the cold, wet pavement outside. The staff, used to Daniel's visits, greeted him respectfully. Their eyes widened slightly when they saw the woman with him. Her clothes were worn, her hair tangled, and her shoes nearly broken. Yet Daniel walked beside her with quiet confidence. As if she belonged, he asked for a private corner table. Away from curious eyes, the waiter placed menus in front of them. The woman, still nervous, stared at the elegant leather-bound menu with wide eyes. She looked overwhelmed. Her fingers trembled as she touched the edge of the page. The names of dishes, written in French and Italian, meant nothing to her. Daniel noticed her hesitation. He closed the menu and said gently, "Order anything you like. Don't worry about the price. You're my guest tonight." Her lips quivered into the faintest smile, but she whispered, I don't even know what these words mean." For the first time in a long while, Daniel laughed, not a cold laugh, but a genuine one. "Then let me order for both of us," he said. He asked the waiter to bring a warm soup, fresh bread, and roasted chicken, something simple yet comforting. When the food arrived, she stared at it as if it were a treasure. Slowly, she took a bite of the soup, her eyes filled with tears. She lowered the spoon and wiped her face quickly. Embarrassed to show emotion, Daniel pretended not to notice, giving her dignity, but deep inside, he felt something stir in his chest. For years, he had dined with people who cared more about status than taste, about appearances more than company. Tonight, watching this woman eat with such raw gratitude felt more genuine than all those business dinners combined. After a few moments, Daniel spoke. "What's your name?" The woman hesitated before answering. "Emily," she said softly. Her voice carried both fragility and strength. "Emily?" Daniel repeated, as if testing the sound of her name. "How long have you been out there?" Her eyes dropped to the table. "Months, maybe longer. I stopped counting. Life was different once. I had a job, a small apartment, friends. But then things fell apart. I lost one thing after another until there was nothing left." Daniel listened quietly. He did not interrupt. Her story was painful, but there was dignity in the way she told it. She did not beg for pity. She simply spoke the truth. "You don't have family?" he asked carefully. She shook her head. "No one left who would take me in. I tried to survive on my own. Sometimes people are kind. Sometimes they are cruel, but I keep going. That's all I can do." Daniel felt a weight in his chest. He thought about his own loneliness. His empty mansion, his cold nights. He had everything, yet nothing. Emily had nothing, yet still carried herself with quiet resilience. For the first time, he realized their worlds, though different, were not so far apart. As they finished the meal, Daniel leaned back in his chair. He studied Emily silently. Her face was tired, but her eyes were bright. There was something unbreakable about her spirit, something even Victoria, with all her beauty and charm, never had. On the drive back, the rain had stopped. The city glistened under the streetlights. Emily sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap. She felt both grateful and uncertain. Why was this man helping her? What did he want in return? Finally, she asked in a cautious voice, "Why did you stop for me? You could have driven past like everyone else." Daniel gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. He thought for a moment before answering. "Because you looked like you hadn't given up? Many people on the street, they've lost hope, but you still had something in your eyes. I don't know why. But it made me stop." Emily looked at him. Her eyes softening, she had expected arrogance, maybe a cruel joke, but instead she saw honesty. A man who had everything yet seemed just as lost as she was. When Daniel pulled up in front of his mansion, Emily's breath caught in her throat. The gates opened silently, revealing the vast garden, the tall glass windows and the grand doors. She had never seen such wealth up close. She looked at him nervously. "Why are you bringing me here?" Daniel answered simply. "Because you need a safe place tonight, and I need company more than I realized." For a moment, silence filled the car. Emily did not know whether to trust him, but her body was tired, her mind worn out. She nodded slowly, accepting his offer. Inside the mansion, the warmth and luxury surrounded her like a dream. She stood frozen at the doorway, afraid to touch anything, afraid to break something. Daniel noticed her hesitation and said calmly, "You belong here as much as anyone else. Don't be afraid." For the first time in years, Daniel felt a strange peace in his home. Not because of wealth, not because of status, but because he was not alone. Emily, though a stranger, carried with her something he had lost long ago: human connection. As he showed her to a guest room, Daniel felt the weight of the wedding invitation in his pocket. He had almost forgotten it during this night. Almost, but not completely, and deep in his heart, a daring thought began to form. A thought that would soon change both their lives forever. The morning sun filled Daniel's mansion with golden light, but his thoughts were far from bright. He sat at the long dining table, staring at the untouched breakfast in front of him. The folded wedding invitation lay beside his plate, its golden edges shining like a cruel reminder. Emily entered the room slowly, wearing simple clothes Daniel had given her the night before. They were not fancy, but they were clean. She looked fresher. Though still cautious, her eyes wandered over the tall ceilings, the elegant chandeliers, the polished floors. She had never lived in such a place. Daniel noticed her hesitation. "Sit down, eat," he said calmly. She nodded and took a seat across from him. She picked at the food carefully, almost as if she was afraid to take too much. Daniel found himself watching her more than eating his own meal. For years, this table had been empty, filled only with silence, but now for the first time, he felt the space was alive. He didn't want to admit it, but Emily's presence eased something inside him. After a while, her eyes landed on the golden card. "What's that?" she asked softly. Daniel's jaw tightened. He picked up the invitation, running his fingers along the edge. "It's an invitation to a wedding," he said, his tone low. "Whose wedding?" Emily asked, curiosity in her voice. "My ex-fiancée's," Daniel replied bitterly. "Victoria, she left me years ago for another man. Now she's marrying him, and she had the nerve to invite me." Emily's eyes widened. She didn't know what to say. The pain in Daniel's voice was clear. She wanted to comfort him, but she knew words could not erase scars so deep. Daniel leaned back in his chair, a cold smile forming. "I should ignore it, throw it away, pretend I don't care," he muttered. "But something inside me refuses to stay silent. I want to face her. I want to show her that she didn't break me." Emily nodded slowly. She understood the feeling. Life had broken her in many ways, and she too longed for moments where she could stand tall again. Daniel's eyes studied her. A daring thought crossed his mind. It was reckless, almost absurd, but it sparked a strange excitement. He leaned forward and said, "Come with me." Emily blinked. "Confused, to the wedding?" "Yes," Daniel said firmly. "Be my guest." "No. Be more than that. Be the woman I walk in with. Let them wonder who you are. Let Victoria see me with someone stronger. Someone who isn't playing games." Emily's lips parted in shock. "Me? But I can't. I'm nobody. They'll laugh. They'll see through me in a second." Daniel shook his head. His voice was steady. "You're not nobody, Emily. You're someone who survived what most people could never endure. You're stronger than all of them, and if you walk beside me, they'll see it, even if they don't understand it." Her heart pounded. She wanted to believe his words, but doubt clung to her. "I don't belong in that world," she whispered. "Neither do half the people there," Daniel replied with a smirk. "They only pretend, at least you are real." Silence stretched between them. Emily stared at him, searching for a sign of mockery, but there was none. He was serious. He truly wanted her there. "Finally," she asked in a trembling voice, "why me?" Daniel hesitated before answering. "Because when I saw you last night, I saw someone who hadn't given up. You reminded me of something I lost a long time ago. And I want Victoria to see that I've moved forward, not backward." Emily lowered her gaze. Her hands twisted in her lap. Part of her wanted to refuse, to run away before she stepped into a world where she didn't belong. But another part, the part of her that longed for dignity, for strength, for a chance to be seen, whispered that she should accept. After a long pause, she lifted her head. Her voice was quiet but firm. "All right, I'll go. But only if I can walk in there with my head held high, not as a charity case, not as someone you picked up from the street." Daniel's eyes softened. "Then we'll make sure of it," he said. "I'll take care of everything, clothes, shoes, whatever you need. You'll look like you were born for that world." Emily gave a faint smile. "I don't want to just look like I belong, I want to feel it." Daniel nodded. "And you will, trust me." That afternoon, Daniel called a personal stylist to the mansion. Emily was overwhelmed as racks of elegant gowns and pairs of shoes were brought in. Fabrics shimmered, jewels sparkled. Mirrors reflected 100 versions of herself she had never imagined. At first she hesitated, afraid to even touch the clothes. But with gentle encouragement from Daniel, she tried on dress after dress. Each time her posture grew straighter, her eyes brighter. She began to see a version of herself she thought was long gone. Daniel watched in silence, astonished. The woman he had found on the street looked transformed. Yet it wasn't just the clothes, it was the spark returning to her eyes, the quiet confidence building inside her as evening fell. Emily stood before the mirror in a deep blue gown, her hair styled elegantly. She barely recognized herself. She turned to Daniel, unsure. Is this really me? Daniel's gaze lingered. He felt a strange warmth he hadn't felt in years. Yes, he said softly, this is you, Emily, and tomorrow the world will see it too. Emily's heart raced. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was more than her past, more than her pain. She was stepping into a new story, one she never expected, and in that moment, she realized that the wedding ahead wasn't just Daniel's chance to face his past. It was also her chance to reclaim herself. The morning of the wedding came quickly, and Emily barely slept through the night. She lay awake in the soft bed Daniel had given her. Staring at the ceiling, her heart was full of doubt, but also something new. Hope. She had not felt this way in years. The thought of standing beside a millionaire at his ex-fiancée's wedding felt unreal, like something out of a dream, or perhaps a dangerous game. When the sun rose, Daniel's mansion was filled with quiet activity. The stylist returned, along with a hairdresser and a makeup artist. Emily was nervous as they surrounded her. Brushes and tools in their hands, she wanted to run, to hide, to tell Daniel this was all a mistake. But when she looked into his eyes, she found calmness. His steady gaze seemed to say, "You can do this." The transformation began slowly. The hairdresser washed and styled her dark hair, twisting it into soft waves that framed her face. The makeup artist worked carefully, enhancing her natural beauty rather than hiding it. A touch of color on her lips, a soft glow on her cheeks. And suddenly Emily no longer looked tired and fragile. She looked radiant. Finally, the stylist brought out the deep blue gown Daniel had chosen. Its fabric shimmered under the light. Elegant yet strong, Emily slipped into it, her hands trembling as she adjusted the straps. When she turned to the mirror, she froze. The reflection staring back at her was not the woman she had seen in alleys and shelters. This was a woman of grace. A woman who belonged in any ballroom. Tears filled her eyes. "I don't recognize myself," she whispered. Daniel, standing near the doorway, shook his head. "No, Emily, this is who you are. This is who you've always been. The world just didn't see it until now." Emily turned to him, her heart thudding in her chest for a moment. She almost believed him completely. As the final touches were done, Daniel himself dressed in a sharp black suit. His tie perfectly tied, his shoes shining, he looked powerful, confident, untouchable. But when he looked at Emily, something softened in his expression. She noticed it, though neither of them spoke of it. When they stepped out of the mansion together, the driver held open the door of the sleek black car. The staff who caught glimpses of Emily could hardly hide their surprise. Whispers filled the air. Who is she? Where did she come from? But Daniel ignored them all. For him, the only thing that mattered was that Emily walked beside him with her head high. The drive to the wedding venue was long, and Emily stared out the window, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her stomach twisted with nerves. "What if I embarrass you?" she asked quietly. Daniel glanced at her. "You won't trust me, Emily? You have more strength than you know. Just walk beside me. That's all you need to do." The venue came into view. A grand estate lit with crystal chandeliers and decorated with golden flowers. Cars lined the driveway, luxury vehicles belonging to powerful guests. As the driver parked, Emily's breath caught in her throat. She had never seen so much wealth gathered in one place. "Ready?" Daniel asked, offering his arm. Emily hesitated, then placed her hand lightly on his. Her fingers trembled, but her chin lifted. "Yes," she whispered, though inside her heart was racing. Together they stepped out of the car. Cameras flashed, guests turned their heads. Conversations fell silent as Daniel appeared with a mysterious woman at his side. Gasps and whispers filled the air. People recognized Daniel instantly, but none of them knew Emily. "Who is she?" Someone whispered. "She's stunning." Another murmured. Even those who tried to ignore them could not stop staring. Emily felt the weight of their eyes on her, but instead of shrinking, she stood straighter. She remembered Daniel's words, "You're not nobody," and in that moment she believed them. As they walked into the grand hall, Emily noticed Victoria across the room, dressed in her wedding gown. Her face, painted with pride, froze when she saw Daniel, and then her eyes fell on Emily. A flicker of shock crossed her features, followed quickly by anger masked with a smile. Victoria approached, her voice sweet but sharp. "Daniel, how unexpected, and who is your lovely companion?" Emily's heart pounded, but before Daniel could answer, she smiled politely and said, "I'm Emily. It's a pleasure to meet you." Her voice was calm, steady, even graceful. Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly. Her perfect smile did not falter, but her words carried venom. "How wonderful, Daniel, I see you've brought someone different. How refreshing." Emily caught the insult hidden in those words. For a moment, her insecurities threatened to surface, but she forced herself to hold her ground. She looked directly into Victoria's eyes, her smile unwavering. "Different is often better," she replied softly. A silence fell over the nearby guests. Some gasped, some chuckled quietly. Victoria's mask cracked just a little, and Daniel, standing beside Emily, felt a surge of pride throughout the night. Emily moved with quiet grace. She spoke little, but when she did, her words were thoughtful. People who first judged her by her unknown background soon found themselves curious. Drawn to her dignity, Daniel watched as the impossible unfolded before his eyes. Emily was not just surviving this high society world, she was commanding it. And though he had invited her for his own pride, he now realized she was doing something he could never have planned. Victoria tried to reclaim the spotlight, but no matter what she did, whispers of admiration followed Emily wherever she went. The woman once homeless now stood in a world of diamonds and power, not as a beggar, not as a shadow, but as someone unforgettable. By the end of the evening, Daniel knew something had changed, not only in how the world saw Emily, but in how he saw her. This was no longer about revenge or pride. It was about something far greater, something he hadn't felt in years. And for Emily, the night was only beginning. She did not yet know the strength she was about to reveal, or the shock she would deliver that no one, least of all Victoria, would ever forget. The music in the grand hall played softly, chandeliers sparkled above, and the scent of expensive flowers filled the air. Guests laughed, glasses clinked, and whispers moved like shadows between the tables. But beneath the surface of the glamorous wedding, tension was building. Daniel and Emily had drawn every eye in the room. Wherever they walked, people turned, curiosity burning in their faces. Some admired Emily's grace. Others whispered cruel guesses about her, yet no one could deny that she carried herself like a woman who belonged. Victoria noticed it too. Her smile was wide, but her eyes were sharp. Each time she looked at Daniel with Emily at his side, her heart burned. She had expected Daniel to come alone, broken, maybe bitter. She had imagined his presence would remind him of what he had lost. Instead, he arrived with a woman who outshone half the guests in the room. Unable to resist, Victoria made her move. She floated toward them, her wedding gown trailing behind her like a queen's robe. Her voice was sweet, but her words carried poison. "Daniel, it's so surprising to see you here, and with such a companion. What's her story, I wonder?" Daniel opened his mouth to reply, but Emily, sensing the hidden attack, stepped forward. Her voice was calm, steady. "My story is simple. I'm someone who values honesty and kindness more than wealth. I'm honored to be here." The guests nearby turned their heads. Listening closely, Victoria's smile stiffened. She tilted her head, her eyes narrowing. "How noble. But tell me, Emily, what do you do? Surely a woman so elegant must come from remarkable circles." Emily's heart raced. She could feel every eye pressing against her. Her secret, the life of hunger and cold streets, echoed in her mind. But instead of shrinking, she straightened her shoulders. She met Victoria's gaze and said softly, "I've known struggle, I've known hunger. I've walked roads most people here would never dare to step on. And yet here I stand, that's my circle." A silence fell over the group. A few guests gasped quietly. Some looked uncomfortable, but others nodded with respect. Emily's words carried weight, not because of power or titles, but because of truth. Daniel's chest swelled with pride. He hadn't expected Emily to answer with such strength, her voice, her presence. It was more powerful than any defense he could have spoken. Victoria, however, was furious beneath her mask. She forced a laugh. How refreshing, Daniel, I must say you always had unusual taste. Her words dripped with sarcasm. But Emily did not flinch. She smiled gently, her eyes steady. Sometimes unusual taste is the best taste. The crowd around them chuckled. Whispers spread faster than fire. Victoria's face flushed. For the first time that evening, she felt the spotlight slipping away from her. Her new husband, Richard, approached then. Tall and polished, he placed a hand on Victoria's arm, his voice low. Darling, perhaps you should focus on your guests. But Victoria pulled her arm away, unable to hide her anger. She turned back to Daniel, her eyes flashing. So this is how you choose to show yourself, Daniel? To parade someone just to... Daniel's voice cut through the air. Calm but sharp. I didn't bring Emily to parade her. I brought her because she reminds me what real strength looks like. The words stung Victoria. They echoed louder than the music. Guests exchanged glances, whispers rising again. Emily's presence had shifted the atmosphere. She was no longer just a guest, she was becoming the heart of the evening. The rest of the night, Victoria tried again and again to reclaim attention. She laughed louder, danced gracefully, boasted about her husband's wealth. But the eyes of the crowd often drifted back to Emily. Some approached her with curiosity, asking questions, offering compliments. She answered humbly, never boasting, never pretending. Her honesty drew people closer. Daniel walked beside her, quietly amazed. He had invited her for his pride. But Emily had done something far greater. She had humbled the very people who thought themselves untouchable. At one point, a woman in diamonds leaned close to Emily and whispered, You speak with such strength, dear. May I ask, where were you educated? Emily smiled softly. On the streets, by life itself, she answered. Her voice carried no shame, only truth. The woman blinked in surprise, then gave a small nod, almost in respect. Victoria, standing nearby, overheard. Her anger grew deeper. How dare this woman, a nobody, turn the crowd in her favor? This was supposed to be her night, yet here she was, overshadowed by a stranger who had walked in with Daniel. Finally, Victoria cornered Emily near the balcony. Her voice was low and sharp. I don't know who you think you are, but this is my wedding, this is my world, you don't belong here. Emily looked at her calmly, her voice steady. Maybe you're right. Maybe I don't belong in your world. But people here can see something you can't, they can see truth. And truth belongs everywhere. Victoria's face darkened. She wanted to scream. But the sound of applause from inside cut her off. A toast had begun, Daniel's name was being whispered. Emily's presence being praised for the first time in years. Daniel felt a weight lift from his chest. He no longer felt like the man who had been betrayed. Tonight, with Emily beside him, he felt stronger than ever. And though Emily did not yet know it, the words she had spoken would echo long after the wedding ended. They were not just words of survival. They were the beginning of something that would change both of their lives forever. The night grew louder inside the wedding hall, laughter mixed with music. Champagne glasses sparkled in the hands of wealthy guests, yet, beneath the glittering surface, emotions boiled. Daniel stood tall, Emily beside him, but he could feel the weight of every glance. Every whisper seemed to carry their names. Emily had already surprised everyone with her poise and strength. But the evening was not done testing her. After the dinner, the master of ceremonies announced the moment for speeches one by one. Close friends and family stood to congratulate Victoria and Richard. Their words were filled with praise about wealth, success, and ambition. The audience clapped politely, though their eyes often flicked toward Daniel. Curious about his silence, then Victoria herself rose to speak. She held her glass high, her smile bright but sharp. Tonight, she began, I celebrate not only love but also choices. Choices that make us stronger. Choices that shape our destiny. I chose a partner who matches my ambition, my vision, my world. Some people, sadly, never learn to choose wisely. They cling to weakness, to foolish dreams. Her words cut through the air like knives. Every guest knew who she was referring to. Her eyes flicked toward Daniel, her smile almost triumphant. A few guests laughed nervously. Others shifted uncomfortably. Daniel's jaw tightened. But before he could speak, Emily rose from her seat. The room fell into silence. The sight of this mysterious woman standing to speak was shocking. All eyes turned to her. Victoria's smile faltered for just a moment. Emily's voice was calm but carried strength. "May I say something?" she asked. The host, stunned, nodded and handed her the floor. She lifted her glass, her hands steady. "I've heard many words tonight about choices, about ambition, about wealth. But I want to remind everyone here of something we often forget. True strength isn't measured by money or power. It's measured by how much you can lose and still stand tall. It's measured by kindness when life gives you none. It's measured by the courage to face the world even when it turns its back on you." A hush fell over the hall. Her voice, though soft, carried like a bell. "I don't come from your world," she continued, her eyes meeting the crowd without fear. "I've known hunger. I've known cold nights where no one cared if I lived or died. I've walked the streets with nothing but dignity left. And I've seen how people turn away when they think you have nothing to give them. But standing here tonight, I realize something important. Strength doesn't need diamonds. Strength doesn't need gold. Strength is born in the fire of struggle. And it shines brighter than any jewel you wear." Gasps spread through the crowd. Some eyes filled with tears, some with respect. Daniel's chest ached as he listened. Pride flooding him, Emily lowered her glass slightly, her gaze shifting to Victoria. "And choices," she said softly. "Choices show who we truly are. Some people choose power over loyalty, money over love, appearance over truth. But some people, even when they lose everything, still choose kindness, still choose to keep their dignity. That, to me, is real wealth." The hall erupted into applause. The sound rolled like thunder. Guests stood, clapping harder than they had for any other speech that night. Victoria's face stiffened, her hand gripping her glass tightly. Richard shifted uncomfortably beside her. Daniel stood too, his eyes on Emily. He had never imagined she would speak, much less with such courage. She hadn't just defended him. She had revealed the truth of her soul to everyone. In that moment, he realized she had done more than he ever could to silence the ghosts of his past. Victoria tried to smile, but her mask was cracking. The applause wasn't for her, it wasn't for her husband. It was for Emily, the woman she had tried to belittle, the woman she thought didn't belong, and now, this woman stood higher than her in the eyes of the crowd. When Emily sat back down, Daniel leaned toward her, his voice low. "You didn't have to do that." Emily met his eyes. "Yes, I did. Not for you, not for her, but for myself. I'm done being invisible, I'm done being silent." Daniel's chest tightened. He had seen power before. He had lived among the powerful, but never had he seen such raw strength as in this woman beside him. As the applause slowly died, the atmosphere of the hall changed. Guests no longer whispered about Emily with curiosity. They spoke with admiration. They approached her to shake her hand, to thank her for her words. Some even admitted her speech made them reflect on their own lives. For the rest of the evening, Emily was not just Daniel's companion, she was the center of attention. The bride, once the star of the night, now stood in her shadow. Every compliment meant for Emily felt like a wound to Victoria. Daniel watched quietly, his heart stirring in ways he hadn't felt in years. When he had invited Emily, it was to make a statement, to shock his ex-fiancée, but now he understood. Emily was not there as a symbol or a weapon. She was there as herself, strong and undeniable. The revelation was not just what Emily said, but what she revealed about herself. She was more than her struggles, more than her pain. She was proof that resilience was more beautiful than diamonds. And Daniel, for the first time since his heartbreak, felt the heavy chains of the past finally breaking. But little did they know the night was far from over. For in the shadows of admiration and applause, jealousy and resentment were still burning. And the true test of Emily's strength and Daniel's heart was yet to come. The applause from Emily's speech still echoed through the grand hall. Guests were stirred, some deeply moved, others quietly unsettled. The atmosphere had shifted completely. What was meant to be a night celebrating Victoria's power had turned into a night where truth and humility stole the stage. Daniel stood close to Emily, his heart heavy yet strangely light at the same time. He felt pride like never before. She had spoken words that no one else in that hall dared to say, words that pierced through the false smiles and glittering masks. He realized he wasn't the only one who had needed her strength. Everyone in that room had needed it too. But for Victoria, the moment was unbearable. Her smile no longer looked natural. Her eyes burned with resentment. She had planned a perfect night, filled with admiration for her new life, yet here she was, overshadowed by a woman she considered beneath her. Guests began to gather around Emily. A wealthy couple asked about her views on kindness. A politician nodded respectfully as if she were someone of great importance. Even those who had mocked her earlier now looked at her with awe. Emily responded humbly, never boasting, never trying to rise above anyone. Her simple truth had done more than any jewel or title could. Victoria excused herself from the crowd. She moved to a corner with her husband, Richard. Her voice was sharp, almost breaking. "This is my wedding, and everyone is talking about her." "Not about us, not about me," Richard sighed, trying to calm her. "You're letting it get to you, darling." "These are just words," Victoria turned on him. "Words? Do you not see? She's making me look small in front of our guests, and Daniel, he's enjoying this. He brought her here for this very reason, but the truth was, Daniel hadn't planned this outcome. His plan was simple, to show he had moved on. Yet Emily had turned his quiet act of defiance into something much larger. She had exposed the hollowness of Victoria's world without ever raising her voice. As the night moved on, the music grew livelier. Couples filled the dance floor. Emily stood at the edge watching, unsure if she belonged there. Daniel approached her, extending his hand. "Dance with me," he said gently. Emily's eyes widened. "I don't know how," she admitted, embarrassed. Daniel smiled faintly. "Then follow me, trust me," she hesitated, then placed her hand in his. He led her onto the floor. The crowd watched, curious, some expecting her to stumble, others hoping she would shine. The music carried them slowly. Daniel guided her movements, whispering softly so only she could hear. Emily's steps were unsure at first, but as she looked into his steady eyes, her fear melted. Soon she moved gracefully, her gown flowing like water. The crowd whispered again. Some clapped, some smiled. Even those who doubted her before now found themselves admiring her courage. Daniel leaned closer and said, "See? You belong anywhere you choose to stand." Emily's heart raced. For the first time in years, she felt light. She wasn't the woman who had slept in alleys or begged for scraps. Tonight, she was a woman who stood in the center of the room, holding her head high, but not everyone felt joy watching them. Victoria's face twisted with fury. She gripped her glass so tightly it nearly shattered. Watching Daniel dance with Emily felt like salt on an old wound. She had left him thinking he would crumble. Instead, he looked stronger, happier, freer. When the dance ended, applause filled the room again. Daniel and Emily bowed slightly. Emily blushed, but she held herself with quiet dignity. She was no longer hiding afterward. Daniel led her to the balcony for some fresh air. The night was cool. The stars glittered above. He turned to her and said softly, "You changed everything tonight, Emily, not just for me, but for yourself too." Emily looked down. "I was terrified, Daniel. My hands shook, my heart raced. But when I stood there, I realized I wasn't speaking for them. I was speaking for every person who has been forgotten, for every voice ignored." Daniel's eyes softened. "And you reminded me of something I lost long ago. You reminded me that wealth means nothing without humanity." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Their eyes met, and in that quiet exchange, both felt something they hadn't expected. Connection, trust, maybe even the beginning of love. But inside the hall, Victoria was making her own decision. Her pride, her jealousy, her anger, it all boiled together. She would not allow her night to be stolen so easily. She whispered to a group of close friends, her words sharp and deliberate. Soon, cruel rumors began to spread across the room. "Do you know who she really is?" Someone whispered loudly enough to be heard. Daniel picked her off the street. She was homeless. "That's why no one knows her." Gasps spread like wildfire. Some guests looked shocked, others doubtful. Many turned their eyes back to Emily, suddenly remembering her mysterious background. Emily, still on the balcony, did not yet know what was unfolding inside. But Daniel, hearing the shift in the crowd, knew something had changed. He glanced through the glass doors, his jaw tightening. He realized Victoria would not rest until she tried to destroy Emily completely. And in that moment, Daniel made a choice. He would not let Emily face this storm alone. Whatever happened next, he would stand by her side. The turning point of the night had come. What began as a wedding for Victoria was now a battle of pride, truth, and dignity. And the outcome would change not just reputations, but lives forever. The whispers inside the hall grew sharper, spreading like fire across dry grass. Some guests leaned closer to one another, their voices hushed but their eyes fixed on Emily. "Homeless," one said with a gasp. "Picked up from the street," another added. Each word stung like arrows aimed at her back. Daniel, watching from the balcony doors, felt his chest tighten. He knew immediately that Victoria's hand was behind this. She couldn't defeat Emily's grace, so she sought to destroy her reputation. But Daniel would not let her stand alone, not tonight, not ever. He stepped back into the hall with Emily by his side. Her smile faded when she noticed the sudden shift in the air. The warm admiration she had felt earlier was now mixed with suspicion, pity, even judgment. People who once clapped for her now whispered behind their glasses of champagne. Emily froze, her heart pounding for a moment. Fear crept in, fear of being exposed, fear of being laughed at. All the memories of cold nights and empty days rushed back. She felt as though the beautiful gown, the glowing lights, the admiring eyes, all of it could vanish in a single breath. Victoria appeared then, her smile wide and cruel. She held her glass high as if she were about to toast again. "Well," she said sweetly, "it seems the mystery has been solved. Our charming guest has quite a colorful past. Don't we all admire Daniel's taste in rescuing the lost?" The laughter that followed was thin, uneasy. Yet the words struck hard. Emily's cheeks burned. She wanted to run, to escape the piercing stares. But Daniel's hand closed firmly around hers, steady and strong. He stepped forward, his voice cutting through the whispers. "Yes, it's true," he said clearly. "Emily was homeless, she suffered, she endured, and yet she stands here with more dignity, more courage, and more strength than anyone else in this room." A hush fell over the hall. Daniel's eyes swept across the crowd, sharp and unyielding. "You call it weakness, I call it resilience. You call it shame, I call it survival. Do not mistake wealth for worth. Many of you have riches, but how many of you could lose everything and still walk with your head high like she does?" The silence deepened. A few guests lowered their eyes, ashamed. The weight of Daniel's words struck harder than any insult Victoria had tried. Emily's heart pounded, but this time it was not from fear. She felt his strength wrapping around her, lifting her, and then, before she could speak, Daniel turned fully toward her. His voice softened, but it carried through the hall. "Emily, you've shown me tonight what real wealth looks like. Not money, not jewels, but truth, resilience, and kindness. You've given me back something I thought I lost forever. Hope." Gasps spread across the crowd. Victoria's smile vanished, and Richard stood frozen beside her. Daniel continued, his eyes never leaving Emily. "I brought you here to prove a point to someone else, but tonight you proved a greater point to me. You are not just my guest. You are the woman who reminded me how to live again." Emily's eyes filled with tears. Her lips trembled, but she found her voice. "And you reminded me that even someone broken can be seen again, can be valued again. For that, Daniel, I thank you." The hall erupted, not with whispers but with applause, stronger, louder, more genuine than before. Guests rose to their feet. Some clapped with respect, others with awe. The cruel rumors that Victoria had planted were buried under the roar of admiration. Victoria, humiliated, tried to maintain her composure, but her face betrayed her fury. For the first time, the night no longer belonged to her. She had lost the crowd, lost the control, and most painfully, lost to the woman she had tried to crush. Emily stood taller now, her tears no longer a sign of weakness but of victory. She realized that she did not need to hide from her past. Her past was not chains, it was proof of her survival, proof of her strength, and in that truth she found freedom. Daniel led her out to the balcony again as the applause continued behind them. The cool night air wrapped around them. He turned to her, his voice low but filled with warmth. "Emily, tonight was supposed to be about revenge, but it became about something else. I don't want this to end here. I don't want to let you go back to being alone." Emily's breath caught. She had never imagined a man like him saying such words to her. Yet his eyes held no pity, no charity, only respect. "Only sincerity," she whispered. "What are you saying, Daniel?" He took her hand gently. "I'm saying stay, not as a guest. Not as someone I rescued, but as someone I need. Someone I admire. Someone who has reminded me what it means to feel alive, Emily. Walk with me, not just tonight, but from now on." Emily's tears slipped down her cheeks, but her smile was brighter than the stars above. "Yes, Daniel," she whispered, "I'll walk with you, not because I need saving, but because together we are stronger." And in that moment, the broken millionaire and the once homeless woman found something that neither wealth nor power could ever buy. Love born of truth, forged in pain and sealed in dignity. The wedding behind them no longer mattered. Victoria's world of glitter and pretense faded into the background. What remained was the beginning of something new, a bond built not on status or lies but on the simple, undeniable strength of two souls who refused to give up. The wedding night ended in chaos for Victoria. It was humiliation she could never erase for Daniel and Emily. It was the start of something neither of them had planned. As they left the glittering hall behind, the sound of applause still echoed in their ears. It felt like the closing of one chapter and the opening of another. The car ride back to Daniel's mansion was quiet, but not with tension. Emily leaned her head against the window. Watching the city lights blur by, her heart was heavy yet strangely light. She had faced her greatest fear, being exposed, and instead of shame, she had found freedom. Daniel sat beside her, silent, but every so often he looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. When they arrived, Daniel led her inside. The mansion felt different now, warmer, brighter, no longer the cold palace of a lonely man. Emily turned to him, her voice soft. "I don't know why you trust me, Daniel. I don't know why you believe in me." He shook his head. "It's not about trust anymore, Emily, it's about truth. You showed me what strength really looks like. You've lived through storms I could never imagine, and you're still standing. That's more valuable than any fortune I own." Emily's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they weren't from fear or shame. They were from something she hadn't felt in years, belonging. Over the next few weeks, Emily's life changed. Daniel didn't treat her like a guest or a project, he treated her like an equal. He gave her space, freedom, and dignity. Slowly, she began to rebuild her confidence. She started reading again, painting again, doing things she had once loved before life stripped them away. Daniel, on the other hand, found himself laughing more, working less. He still ran his empire, but he no longer buried himself in it with Emily around. His house was no longer silent, it was alive, filled with warmth he hadn't known he missed. The world, however, didn't stay silent about what happened at the wedding. Newspapers, blogs, and society pages buzzed with gossip. The homeless woman who stole the spotlight. Headlines read, some mocked but many praised. They called Emily's speech bold, unforgettable. Some even called her a symbol of resilience. At first, Emily was terrified of the attention. She feared the whispers would destroy her again. But Daniel reminded her, they can say what they want, but only you decide who you are. Slowly, she learned to hold her head high in public, walking beside him without shame. Victoria, meanwhile, was left to deal with the fallout. Her perfect wedding had turned into a story she could not control. The man she thought she had defeated stood taller than ever, and the woman she tried to humiliate had become a figure of admiration. No matter what she said afterward, people remembered Emily's words more than her vows. Months passed and Emily's transformation continued. She enrolled in classes, determined to build a career again. Daniel supported her every step, but he never carried her. He walked beside her. Emily insisted on earning her place, proving to herself that she was more than just a survivor. Their bond deepened with each passing day. Daniel, once broken by betrayal, found himself opening his heart again. He had thought love was weakness, but Emily showed him love was the greatest strength of all. Emily, once forgotten by the world, found in Daniel not a savior, but a partner who saw her worth even when others could not. One evening, months after the wedding, Daniel and Emily returned to the balcony of the mansion, the same place where they had spoken their first honest words. The city lights shimmered below. Emily leaned on the railing, her hair brushing against the cool night breeze. Daniel stood beside her, his voice steady. "Emily, that night at the wedding, you saved me in more ways than you'll ever know, and I don't ever want to go back to the man I was before you." Emily turned to him, her eyes shining. "And you saved me, Daniel. You gave me back my voice, my dignity, my place in the world." Daniel took her hands in his. "Then let's keep walking this road together no matter where it leads," Emily smiled. Her heart full. "Together," she whispered, and so, the man who once had everything but nothing, and the woman who once had nothing but dignity, built a new life side by side, not a life of pretense, not a life built on wealth or power, but a life built on truth, resilience, and love. It wasn't the ending either of them expected, but it was the beginning of everything they had been searching for. Months turned into a year, and the story of Daniel and Emily no longer felt like a scandal. It had become an inspiration. What began as whispers at a wedding turned into a tale that spread through the city. The millionaire who once lived alone in silence, and the homeless woman who once slept under bridges were now seen walking hand in hand, stronger together. Emily had changed more than her own life. She had changed Daniel's too. His once cold mansion was now filled with laughter, warmth, and meaning. She encouraged him to host charity events, to use his wealth for something greater, and together, they started a foundation to help those who had fallen through life's cracks. Emily became the voice of the forgotten, standing in front of crowds not with shame, but with courage. At first she was nervous, but every time she spoke, people listened. They didn't hear the words of a broken woman. They heard the strength of someone who had survived. Daniel stood by her side at every event, proud, his heart filled with admiration. But the world was not the only one watching. Victoria heard the stories too. She read the headlines, saw the pictures, and each time her bitterness grew deeper. The night of her wedding had been meant to crown her victory, but instead, it marked the rise of the very people she tried to destroy. One evening at a large charity gala, Victoria appeared. The crowd shifted as she walked in, her presence still commanding, but her eyes carried shadows. She approached Daniel and Emily, her smile forced. "So," she said, her voice low, "it seems you've made quite the name for yourself." Emily turned to face her calmly. She no longer felt the fear that once gripped her. Her voice was steady. "Not a name, Victoria, a purpose. That's something money alone cannot buy." Daniel stood silently, letting Emily's words carry the weight. Victoria's lips tightened. For a moment she had no reply. The woman she once mocked now stood taller than her, and there was nothing she could do to take that away. The gala continued, filled with applause and speeches. When Emily took the stage, the entire room quieted. Her voice was clear, strong. "A year ago I had nothing, not even a place to call home, but I had dignity, and I refused to let it die tonight. I stand here not because I was rescued, but because someone believed in me, and because I chose not to give up on myself." Her words carried across the hall, echoing in the hearts of everyone listening. Some wiped tears from their eyes, others nodded, inspired. Daniel watched her with pride so deep it ached. He realized that she was no longer just part of his story. He was part of hers. When the applause rose like thunder, Emily stepped down from the stage. Daniel took her hand, whispering, "You were extraordinary." She smiled softly. "I was just honest. That's all." That night, as they returned home, Daniel led her once more to the balcony. The city stretched before them. Glittering in the night, he turned to her, his voice trembling with sincerity. "Emily, you've given me more than love. You've given me meaning. You turned my empty life into something I can finally be proud of. I want us to last forever." Emily's eyes filled with tears. She had never dreamed of hearing such words. Not after all the pain, yet here they were, two souls who had found light in each other. She whispered, "Forever, Daniel." "That's all I want too," and under the stars, with the city as their witness, Daniel kissed her gently, sealing a promise not of wealth or status, but of love born from truth. From that night forward, their story was no longer about a millionaire and a homeless woman. It was about two people who refused to be defined by their past, who chose to rise together. Victoria faded from the headlines, her bitterness lost in silence, but Daniel and Emily's names lived on, not as gossip, but as a symbol of resilience, courage, and the power of second chances. The final triumph was not in wealth, not in revenge, but in love that grew from brokenness into something unshakable. Their lives, once marked by loss and betrayal, were now written with hope, and as they stood side by side, they knew one truth above all: this was only the beginning.